I do now want to switch gears a little bit and talk more about Israel. What do you make of the Biden administration's response to the situation unfolding in the Middle East right now?
Look, I think the Biden administration has been superb on this issue. And what I mean by that is that they have done what I would hope that they would do, which is stand very strong with Israel, especially at a moment when Israel suffered a horrible terrorist attack. I mean, an unimaginable. And if you've seen the pictures of, raped women, murdered, elderly senior citizens, babies burned, it's almost inconceivable what the tragedy was that was perpetrated upon them by Hamas. So he stood strong with Israel, but I will tell you, as somebody who spends an awful lot of time on our national security, he, the national security advisor, the secretary of state, have said over and over and over to the Israelis and every day that, look, you are totally justified defending yourself and going after this group that did this historical crime against you, but you have to do it observing the laws of armed conflict, protecting civilians, and in such a way that the millions of people in Gaza who have nothing to do with Hamas are not put unnecessarily in harm's way. So I think the president has been exactly right. He said exactly what we need to do, which is that we will never, ever tolerate the kind of terrorist attack that Israel experienced. But that doesn't mean that it's okay to violate the humanitarian values that are so important for the civilians of Gaza.
Not many, but some in your party have called for a ceasefire. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said that those calling for a ceasefire simply don't understand Hamas. What do you make of calls for a ceasefire?
Well, I disagree with those calls for this reason. And I don't know whether the people who are calling for a ceasefire don't understand Hamas. I think it's pretty hard not to understand Hamas given what they did. I don't like using the word, but it's hard to see them as anything other than pure, unadulterated evil. I think it's more people reacting to the Israeli military operations in a very tight space in Gaza, right? And of course, your heart breaks at the humanitarian tragedy. How can it not? But what I would say, and I've said this to any number of people who've asked me to support a ceasefire, is so if the Israelis just stand down, and the hundreds of people who planned and undertook this murderous terrorist attack, what about them? Are we just going to say there's no justice that you need to face? So for somebody to convince me that a ceasefire is a good idea, you need to explain to me how a ceasefire brings the perpetrators of this historical terrorist brutal attack to justice. And you also need to explain to me, look, I know exactly what Hamas would do. I'm on the intelligence committee. If they were offered a ceasefire, that morning, they would begin the process of importing the arms, of planning the next operation to murder Israelis. And by the way, don't take it from me. They've said they would do that. So I do think that even though we need to be absolutely focused, as the president is, on humanitarian issues and on the Israeli military doing this in a way consistent with the laws of armed conflict, calls for a ceasefire in the face of that injustice and that brutality and what Hamas would do, I think, are misplaced.